On this edition of Alberta Dugout Stories, the podcast, we sit down with a Canadian baseball writing legend. Bob Elliott joins us for a trip down memory lane and more. Welcome to Alberta Dugout Stories, the podcast. I'm Joe McFarland. It means a lot as a journalist to have the faith and the trust of your audience. It takes a special kind of journalist to also have the unfettered respect of the people you're interviewing as well. It's those relationships that allow you to get inside scoops and break stories. That track record paves the way for your legacy. In the Canadian baseball world, legend is a word used to describe Bob Elliott. His ability to build relationships was unmatched in his decades of covering the Montreal Expos and the Toronto Blue Jays. And even in his so-called retirement, he still does his best to bring the sport to his country with the Canadian Baseball Network. A few weeks ago, Elliott came to Alberta to speak at the Okotoks Dogs annual banquet. And as many know, Elliott fell ill early in his address and was rushed to hospital. The great news is he's off the IR and back home. Just before he hit the stage that cold night in Okotoks, Elliott was gracious enough to sit down with us to talk about how he got into baseball, some of his favorite memories, and what he hopes Canadian kids keep in mind as they go through the system. Here is that conversation. Let's go to the very beginning. And how is it that a Kingston boy from, a hockey-laden community ends up getting into baseball?
Well, I think basically, sorry about the voice, I've got a bit of a cold, but it would be passed down from my father. My father was a very good football player. He coached Queen's University, he's in the Queen's Football Hall of Fame, and he played basketball, and he was very good at baseball, and he used to go down to Hull on the weekends and get paid and play under an assumed name, and but baseball was his love, and he during the winter he didn't like hockey, so during the winter it was our tour we'd go from Harvey Milne, his old center fielder's bike shop, to Bert Vince, his old right fielder's smoke shop, to Art Gloin's Shell Station, and they'd say, "Hey, remember the night in Belleville? This happened," and the first one that I ever remember being able to retell was they had a shortstop named Mickey Compo, and the fans were yelling at him, and it was drunk, and it was yelling at him, and if he got rattled, he would make errors. So the on-deck hitter said, "Shut up," and so the guy put his face right up against the screen. He says, "Who's going to make me?" And I guess they handed balls through the back of the backstop, so it was normal screen, and then they had this little part, chicken wire, and that's where the guy put his face. The guy popped him, so the guy had little cross here, blood, little cross here, blood, little here. So that I thought that was just, and I knew both guys, because the one guy, he wound up after my father passed, and we moved to Ottawa. He kind of looked after us in a new city, and the kids grew up calling him Grandpa, and my cousin played for the guy, the hothead, so they were real people, that I could identify with,
How is it that you go from that to journalism? What got you thinking that's the way of the future for you?
I was just really, really lucky. I was in Kingston. They had like a 6-team senior league, and this fellow that had coached the juniors with my father, Cliffy Earl, he stopped by the house and he said, "You going down to the season opener tonight?" And he said, "Well, I got something to do. Why don't you take my son, and I'll be half an hour behind you." So we get down there, no lights, so it's supposed to start at 6:15, and we can see we're sitting up on the berm in left field, and we can see the president, going through the stands. About 400 people are down the third base line, then behind first base line, then behind home plate. Now he comes up the third base line. So this guy, he was a very devout Christian, but he could make you feel about that small. So he starts screaming at him, for John's sakes, what time does the 6:15 game start, Kenny? Let's go. He said, well, he says, the scorekeeper passed over the winner. He said, we don't have a scorekeeper. We're not starting the game without a scorekeeper. And Cliffy says, give the book to the kid. So I was the kid. So he said, you can't sit here. I said, why not? He says, you have to be behind the backstop so both teams can come over and give you their changes. So I said, all right. So about the fourth inning, he comes over and he says, you have to phone both radio stations. You have to phone the TV station. You have to go down to the newspaper and write up a box score. So I figured I could make the phone calls, but I needed a little work with the box score. So anyways, I did all that. The next day, the guy heard the scores on and saw the story in the paper, and he phoned me, and I was a first-year midget, and he offered me $100 for the season. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, Sunday rainouts, and I did the stats, and I thought I was the richest man in the world. So so anyways, to continue, there was two guys. They didn't like baseball, and it was a 4-man staff at the newspaper. And the one guy wrote a headline. He said, Cincinnati now half game back in the AL. And the other guy had a headline, Dodgers win on pass ball. And he spelled it P-A-S-T instead of P-A-S-S-E-D. So I was a young, smart-ass teenager. I'm not now, but I corrected them both. So the guy threw the thing at, like, my notes. He says, you write the story yourself? So I wrote it. And the only two things they changed were, I think I said Wednesday night instead of last night or vice versa. And I forgot put in the name of the park where the game was played. And it was perfect. Not that these guys were experts. So from then on, I was doing it. And then I think it was the next year, it was 1965, January, I did a biddy basketball tournament. And I'd done a few assignments, but that was the first time I'd ever received a byline. And so I wrote for a newspaper for 50 years and 3 months, yeah.
When you look back on it, a lot of stories told. Any one in particular or any one event stand out in your mind as being, whether it's your favorite or one that just stood out above the rest?
Well, my favorite baseball story, I'm going to tell it tonight, is in 1999, I was the head of the Baseball Writers Association, which may sound like a big deal, but it just, like, it rotates, like there's 26 or 27 chapters, like LA and Anaheim is one chapter, so whatever. So it's our turn. So I have to speak at Cooperstown. So I'm backstage, and Timmy Kirchison, he's with ESPN at the time. He says, "Bobby, you look white." And I said, "Timmy, did you see how many people were out there?" So there was the umpire, Nestor Shylock. There was Orlando Cepeda being inducted, Robin Yount, George Brett, and Nolan Ryan. So I go inside. I go backstage, like a small room. All the Hall of Famers are there. And here comes Beeston, the president of the Blue Jays. He says, "You better not screw this up. You better not screw this up. This is on ESPN. This is on TSN. If you screw this up," he says, "Godfrey, that was the publisher of the paper. He won't let you back into the country. You better not screw this up." So I'm thinking, "Oh my God, I don't need this. This is not any help." So I'm walking along, and I hear this guy say, "Hey, you, come here." It's Willie Mays. So I say, "Me?" He says, "Yeah, come here." He says, "Tell me a baseball story." So I go, "All right, I got one for you." Took me a little bit longer than that, but I said, "Okay, I got one for you." I said, "The last day I was in spring training, Joe DiMaggio passed." He said, "Yep." So I said, "Now it's April, and Toronto is in New York, and they have another ceremony. But they'd already retired somebody, already had a statue, but they had another ceremony." So the next day, every paperhead asked the question, who is now the greatest living ball player since DiMaggio passed? So he said, "Well, what was the answer?" I said, "It doesn't matter. That's not the point." So I said, about 6 weeks later, I'm in Montreal, and Felipe Alou is managing. And I said, Felipe, I said, you played 6 years in right field with the Giants, with Willie Mays in center, and you played 7 years with the Braves, right beside Hank Aaron. I said, who's the better player? And he says, he thought for a long time, and he says, it's Willie Mays without a doubt. And you know, like how older people, I'm probably getting there, they kind of go with they're a little hunched over. Like he would like ramrod straight when I gave him the answer, right? And he said, thank you very much, you've made my day. He said, I respect Felipe a lot and everything. And I said, can I ask you one question? He said, sure. I said, why'd you call me over, sir? I said, we've never met before. And he says, well, when you leave, you look to your right and you look to your left. So I looked to my left, and there was Governor Pataki of New York, and to my right was Governor Bush, who of Quebec, not Quebec, of Texas. So I was a much better choice than a politician to Willie Mays. So now everybody has spoken except Brett. Brett gave the best speech of all. So I go backstage to go to the bathroom, and here's Nolan Ryan has spoken. Here's Bush getting in a van, and I knew him from the Rangers. So Bush, here was Bush. Bush would go, he said, watch this. And he'd point to a guard down there at Arlington, up with his back to us, right? He'd go, and the guard who had the thing in would like jump. So he didn't have his eye on the son of the president at the time. So anyways, he was a good guy. He was always joking and everything. So I had spoken, and so I start towards the van. He gets out of the van. He says, good job. And so I go like this, and I move my hand up like here. I was going to whisper something like, because there was talk he was going to run for president. I don't know, like good luck against the Democrat. I don't remember what I was going to say. But as soon as I go like this, I get boom right here, right in the solar plexus by one of those Texas Rangers wearing the earplugs, not one of the Texas Rangers wearing the uniforms. But my speech was, I don't know, went 5 minutes or whatever. So I'm done, all right? All I got to do is read the plaque. And I was presenting the Spink Award to a man named Bob Stevens from San Francisco. So I said, all I got to do is read this. So first graph, second graph, third graph. I'm in my last graph. I'm home free. I got a breakaway, right? So the last graph is, Bob Stevens was a fair and accurate reporter. So I go, Bob Stevens was a fair and accurate. Bob Stevens was a fair and acolyte. And then they fouled it up a third time. I couldn't say the word accurate. So finally, I just looked up and I said, I just have to spell it. I don't have to say it. So anyways, after the pictures, I'm walking back to my seat beside Killebrew and Bob Feller. And Brooks Robinson calls me over, and I'm thinking, oh, no, he's going to say, no wonder you couldn't say accurate because you're never accurate or something. And he says, good job, son, I think. So Brooks Robinson is one of my favorites. So that's probably my best. I don't know how many Hall of Fame name droppers I put in there, but that Willie Mays, he was one of the best that I ever saw. Yeah.
When you look back on your career, and one of the things that I've taken away from it is your ability to create relationships with players and those involved in the game. And I wonder who stands out most? Who's the one guy who you really thought highest of when it came to the relationship you were able to build with them, or the conversations you were able to have with them, that kind of thing?
Well, there's a bunch. Like I got along with Hanky very well. Pat Henkin, Borders, a lot of guys. It was different back in those days, and like back when we flew the charters with the Expos, Woody Fryman was Buck Rogers, Jerry White, a lot of guys like that. But I mean, I would say recently it would have been Batista, I think, because I wrote so many things about him. We ran there was, and he was in Roy Halladay. But I would say, but there's it's tough to name. I remember one time we had we used to play this game when we were in rain delays or in airport lineups. Like, who's the player that you had the worst relationship with ever, and who's the player you had the best relationship ever? Who is it? So that was Timmy Kirchner's game. So the answer for me was the same player. It was George Bell. His first about 2.5 months, I think, during his MVP year, he wouldn't speak to me. So I go to the All-Star game in Oakland, and I come around the corner. I'm going to the American League room to talk to La Russa, because La Russa's a coach. La Russa was managed in San Pedro de Macorís, and there was a little kid that lived in right field. It used to come over and say, "Mr. La Russa, hit me balls. And he had his leg was kind of sideways or whatever. He had to have surgery. He said, "Someday I'm gonna get my leg fixed, and I'm gonna come to America, and I'm gonna play for you." Anyways, it was Tony Fernandez. So I see George, and he goes to the visiting room, which for an All-Star game is a National League room. So now we're coming back. The La Russa's office is closed, so we come around the corner, and boom, we bump into each other. He says, "What are you doing here, man?" I said, "I came out here to cover you." "Oh, really? Thanks, man." So then we've been pals ever since, and then we wrote a book, split $100,000, which was the largest advance for a baseball book that I know. And he's a good friend. He's very, very kind to my son on a couple of instances. Well, the instance was my son was whatever grade he was, in grade 4 or 5, and he did a speech, and he made the finals with another boy and a girl. So the boy said Kelly Gruber's the greatest player in the history of the Toronto Blue Jays franchise. So my son argued that it was Bell. So he got to the conclusion, and he went, and like he raised his voice, and he said to the other boy, "And that's why." So he didn't win because he lost his composure, according to the teacher. So I told George that story. So he was with the White Sox then. So he says, "Bring him down," and so I brought him down, and he brought him down near the dugout, and he shook hands and made a big fuss. So yeah, George, in his first game back with the White Sox, this is a special one. First game back with the White Sox, he's into Toronto. He goes 0 for 5. I think he struck out. He either struck out twice and grounded a double play 3 times, or vice versa, and with the bases loaded. So they won't. He won't talk. So everybody's just killing him, right? So he says, "Hey man, give me a ride back to the Western." I said, "Yeah, sure, no problem." So I had to wait we get outside the clubhouse. I had to wait 45 minutes. He was talking to 2 kids in wheelchairs. So I go in the next day. I said, "Hey, Mike," I was off that night. I said, "Mike," I said, "I want to write that." He said, "Nah." He says, "You wrote the book. It'd be like, I said, "The book is on sale for 99 cents. I said, "That was 3 years ago." I said, "That's another side of the guy that people don't see." He said, "Nah." So whatever. They've all got their bad moments, and like Votto is a good guy, and like I know, what he said last year was like, I don't give a rat's ass, but like I don't know how much you travel in the States, but it can get to you. Like I'm taking a cab to the ballpark in Milwaukee, and the guy says, "Where are you from?" I said, "Toronto." He said, "Oh, really?" He says, How far would I have to go if I flew to Toronto to shoot a bear?" I said, I don't know, probably about 9-hour drive north. So he turns around, he says, "Well, why the hell would I go to Toronto?" And then I went to a wedding in Atlanta last year, and the guy looks at my driver's license and he says, "Oh, Mississauga." He said, he said, "I got a cousin in Calgary. Do you know him?" "No, I don't know him." Like they think we're all, like, so Paxton was, I don't know, 6 or 7 years younger than Votto. The guy, it was not they think that everybody. It's a great close-knit community, but the Canadian baseball community. But like Adam Loans told me about guys asking him, hey, what was it like pitching with Real Cormier, who was like 10 years older? You know, the American, the average grade 10 student here knows more about America, the United States, than the average, the American does about Canada.
Speaking of the local game, you are here in Okotoks, and I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about just your thoughts, given that you are running Canadian Baseball Network as well. Give me a few of your anecdotes as far as what you see out of the Canadian game, some of the young talent coming through this country, and what are we seeing trends wise? Are we seeing a resurgence of the game here, or give us some thoughts on that aspect of the game here?
Well, the number of total number of Canadians in the big leagues this year was down compared to, like, I don't know, maybe about 6 years ago when it was 24 or something, the highest since 1880. But the thing is, you got guys coming, like Gareth Morgan got $2 million. Both Naylor brothers got over $2 million. Paul Quantrill's son Cal was at Stanford. He got $3 million. And there's kids coming, like the one futures game. There was 4 guys. There was Naylor, Quantrill, the BC guy, Rowan Wick, and I forget who the 4th guy. But there's kids. I would say the biggest change it used to be when I started tracking these guys. The draft would go pitcher, 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 position player, pitcher, pitcher. Now it's position player, pitcher. And nobody has the answer for it. I mean, the answer is most scouts say it's the indoor facilities, but you can't repeat because indoors you can do the pitching and you can do the hitting, but like where our weakest as a nation, our weakest position is shortstop. So that, but. Naylor's a first baseman. The older Naylor's a first baseman / outfielder, and Morgan's an outfielder, and the younger Naylor is either a catcher or a third baseman. And Siratka's there's a Siratka. I remember the day he pitched against the Blue Jays, and he had 2 out, and I think he only allowed the 1 run, and it was E6. E5, double, walk, E6, double, E6. It was just awful, right? Just like one of the worst innings you could remember. So, in Dunedin, the press box is here. The next booth is the general manager's box. Next booth is Wilner's box, the fan. So, I went to the washroom, and Wilner had, it's piped in, so you could hear Siratka giving it, telling him about his inning. And he spoke very well, as he always does. So then, I don't know, a couple innings later, I went out to make a phone call or something, and there was Alex going to take the elevator down. So he ignores the elevator. He says, come on in the room. He says, wait till you hear this. So Dana Brown was one of their top scouts. He just went to the Braves. But he told Siratka, he says, look, we promise you, if we draft you and we sign you, we'll draft a shortstop too, because the guy had a bad game.
It's always a great thing to have, is seeing the progression of these players as they make their way through. When you speak to a crowd such as tonight, you're going to have a bunch of high schoolers here. What's your message to them as they make their way through the system and make their way up to a college level, that kind of thing?
The one message I have is that I learned it from personal experience. In 2007, I was helping coach a team, and we had this little bitty center fielder. He wasn't much of a hitter. He'd either hit 9th or he'd hit 10th. And then we had this stud who was always batted 3rd, and he caught. if he caught and he was the number one pitcher and everything. We won the Canadian Championship in Quebec Pee-wees. But the little center fielder threw it a runner, or we'd had to play an extra game or something. Like, he clinched our on the run differential, I forget. So it was a big play. So he was fully worthy of being in the lineup defensively. So 2 years later, we win it again. The other guy's a stud. I'm not going to tell you his name. The center fielder, same thing, hit ninth. Was often asked just a bunt. Couldn't pull the ball, left-handed hitter. So now it's 2 years later, and I'm up in St. Mary's. And I was speaking, I think, I forget what I was speaking, but I came around the corner, and there's the stud. And he was the first 15-year-old on Team Ontario's 18-year-old team, which was a big deal. And now this is the next year. He's with the Ontario Blue Jays. I said, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be... They go south for the month of July. Why are you here? I quit. I said, you quit? Oh, okay. So, I'm not going to dress him down. I mean, he's doing what he wants. That's whatever. So the next year after that, I was coaching, and we had the little center fielder's younger brother as a column. So I said, David, how's your brother? How's he doing? Pretty good, yeah. He went to school in Quebec, a prep school. So I said, is he coming tonight? He said, I don't know. He might come. He's going to work out. So the game ends, and I said, where's your father? Like, you can't leave a kid there alone, right? And he said, oh, he's behind the backstop. I said, well, I can't see him. He said, well, Coach, he's standing right there, right at the... I said, well, who's that big tall guy beside him? He says, that's my brother. It was Mark Jankowski. That was our guy. So, I mean, look around. Like, you're a peewee here, and you're the smallest guy, or the third smallest guy, and you want to throw the ball hard, and if you'd have paid me $1 million, or if you'd have asked me to predict for $10 or whatever, I'm not a big bettor. Who was going to be the better player? I'd have picked the stud, the bigger kid, but he never grew after Bantam. Whereas I think he grew 11 years, and I'm not a hockey guy, but I phoned somebody for his stats today. I think he's got 8 goals. I don't know what line is he on. Third line, yeah. But he did that's it. The other guy, the head guy, and we also had on that team Josh Anderson, who was a backup kind of. But he stole the signs of the Quebec guys in the final against at Vaughan in the Bantams, and we beat them 4-2. But I think he's got about 18 goals or something for Columbus, and so we joke like we really coached them up. They're in the NHL, But we had Nathan D'Souza. He signed with the Blue Jays, and Dayton Daw signed with the Yankees, and. I don't know, they spent 2 or 3 years in the minor leagues. Yeah. And a bunch of boys went to school, Boston College and other places.
Bob, music is basically saying, hey, it's time for us to go. I do appreciate the time. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
An absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.
Again, glad to hear Bob is doing well again. If you want to follow him on Twitter, do so, @Elliott Baseball. That'll do it for this week's edition of Alberta Dugout Stories, the podcast. Thanks so much for listening.